There was a season in life when Aquarius would wake up every morning, feeling like everything was still moving normally. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet part of the soul had already started to change. It's the kind of feeling you get when you walk past an old street late at night, and suddenly realize you don't feel the same anymore. Some people call that growing up. Some people think it's just exhaustion, after carrying too much pressure for too long. But there are moments when the heart seems to whisper that an old chapter has started to become too small for who we're becoming. Aquarius often carries a world of thoughts that nobody else can see. They're used to holding everything inside, used to being the one who understands everyone else, more than being understood themselves. And then one day something shifts. A strange feeling appears. Like a quiet door somewhere in life has started to open softly enough that most people would miss it, but deeply enough that a soul can no longer return to its old version of itself. And maybe tonight's journey begins in that exact moment. Aquarius often moves through life with a calm expression on the surface. They can sit in a crowded room still talking, still smiling, still listening to people speak about ordinary things. From the outside, nothing really seems different. The mornings still begin with the same familiar alarm clock. The cup of coffee still rests in the same corner of the table. Cars still pass by outside at the same hour every day. The same conversations repeat themselves between work, responsibility, and answers that have almost become automatic. Sometimes life feels like a train that has stayed on the same tracks for too long, so long that people forget what it even feels like to truly want something different. And Aquarius has often lived that way for a very long time. They're used to being the understanding one, the calm one, the one who doesn't want to disappoint anybody. So even when they're exhausted inside, they still say, "I'm fine." Even when the heart slowly begins filling with empty spaces that are hard to explain, they continue playing their role, as if nothing is happening at all. One of the quiet truths about Aquarius is that they tend to hide their emotions very deeply. Not because they're cold, but because they've grown used to handling everything alone. Like a house that always leaves the porch light on to make other people feel warm and welcome, while behind that same door, the owner has been sitting in silence for a very long time, without anyone noticing. And then a few strange moments begin to appear. A night drive home that lasts a little later than usual. Standing in front of the mirror for too long. Waking up one morning and suddenly feeling like the familiar room around them has become strangely unfamiliar. The feeling isn't dramatic. It arrives quietly, like the changing of seasons. Like walking into a home you once deeply loved and realizing for the first time that your heart no longer belongs there. A lot of people try to bury that feeling with busyness. More work, more conversations, more noise. But the more Aquarius tries to distract themselves, the louder that inner voice begins to sound. A very small voice, saying maybe they've spent too many years living as the version of themselves that other people needed. Maybe a part of the soul has been silent for far too long. And what makes moments like this so powerful is that they usually arrive when nobody is prepared for them. No fireworks. No mystical signs. No dramatic movie-like turning point. Just an ordinary evening where Aquarius sits down, looks at their life for a long moment, and realizes for the first time that they no longer want to keep moving in the same endless rhythm. A lot of people believe change has to begin with huge decisions. But some of the most important doors in life actually open through very small emotions we once ignored. A little exhaustion. A little loneliness. A quiet desire to live more honestly with ourselves. And truthfully, that feeling isn't always comfortable. Because when someone begins realizing their soul needs to change, they also begin realizing that certain old parts of life no longer fit anymore. And sometimes that makes Aquarius feel deeply alone. They start wondering why they no longer feel excited by the things that once felt familiar. Why, in the middle of crowded conversations, the heart still feels so empty. But before a seed ever breaks through the soil, it spends a very long time resting in the dark. And people are sometimes the same way. Before stepping into a new chapter of life, we often go through a season where everything inside us begins shifting in silence. Aquarius may be standing at that doorway right now. A place where the soul slowly begins waking up, after years of doing nothing but surviving. A place where they begin understanding that being strong does not always mean enduring forever. And maybe from that very quiet moment a new door has already started to open. Some people move through their exhaustion by letting it spill outward. Aquarius is different. They tend to stay quiet far longer than anyone realizes. They still show up on time, still answer messages, still carry their responsibilities with that familiar calmness people have grown used to. From a distance everything seems perfectly fine. But only those who have stayed awake deep into the night, with a mind that refuses to rest, truly understand how heavy that feeling can become. It's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't live in the body. It comes from holding yourself together for too long, just to remain the version of yourself that makes everyone else feel safe. Aquarius often carries a deep ability to listen. They notice other people's emotions. They remember the small changes in someone's voice. They can recognize sadness, even when the person in front of them is smiling. And over time they slowly grow, used to placing themselves last. Like someone constantly holding an umbrella over others during the rain, only to look back later and realize their own shoulders have been cold and soaked for a very long time. A lot of Aquarius souls grow up believing they have to be strong. They have to be understanding. They have to mature faster than their own emotions. So they learn how to swallow difficult feelings in silence. They learn how to calm themselves down whenever life becomes too overwhelming. But the human heart is a strange thing. It can endure so much until one very small moment suddenly makes it ache. An old song playing during a late-night drive. A random question from someone asking, "Are you really okay lately?" And in that exact moment, Aquarius realizes how long it has been since they honestly answered that question for themselves. A lot of the time, what exhausts them most isn't external pressure. It's the constant feeling of adjusting themselves to fit everyone else's expectations. In every place, a different version of themselves appears. A version strong enough to keep the family from worrying. A version positive enough to reassure friends. A version professional enough to keep work moving forward. And after playing all of those gentle roles, Aquarius sometimes returns home feeling strangely empty. Like they've spent so much energy becoming the person other people needed that they've forgotten what they themselves truly need anymore. The loneliness of Aquarius is rarely loud. It feels more like the soft yellow kitchen light, still glowing after midnight. Everyone else has gone to sleep, and there's only one person left sitting quietly, with thousands of thoughts that still don't have names. Some people look at Aquarius and assume they're fine simply because they rarely fall apart in front of anyone. But many of the strongest souls are actually the ones silently stitching themselves back together. Every single day without telling anyone. Maybe that's why Aquarius sometimes feels like a house with an open door. Everyone who walks in finds comfort there. Everyone who leaves carries away a little warmth. Except the owner of the house themselves, who has almost forgotten what true rest even feels like. And eventually a very late night arrives. A night where the silence feels deeper than usual. Aquarius sits alone looking back at the years they've lived through, and suddenly asks themselves,
"If I stop trying to make everyone happy, then who am I really?"
That question scares a lot of people, because the moment someone begins questioning the version of themselves they've maintained for too long, they also begin standing in front of the door to change. And change doesn't always begin with huge actions. Sometimes it begins with honesty. Honesty for the first time in a very long while. Admitting that you're tired. Admitting that you also need to be heard. Admitting that this heart cannot spend its entire life existing only as a shelter for everyone else. And strangely enough, the moments that seem like weakness at first often become the very places where light finally begins to enter. like a tiny window inside a room that has been dark for years. At first it's only a thin line of light, but it's enough for someone to realize that beyond all the familiar endurance they've carried for so long, life may still hold softer ways of living for them. After so many long nights, where the mind could never fully rest, Aquarius slowly begins seeing life through different eyes. Everything still moves the same way. The city is still crowded. The phone still lights up with familiar notifications. The daily routines still repeat themselves like loops that have existed for years. But somewhere in the way the heart responds to the world, something has quietly changed. Aquarius becomes more sensitive to silence. An old song drifting out from a small roadside cafe can suddenly make them sit still for a few minutes longer than usual. A simple sentence from someone can unexpectedly touch a part of the soul they thought they had forgotten. Even certain mornings they watch sunlight move across the window and realize they no longer want to keep chasing the same old rhythm of life. And the strange thing is, life rarely sends signs through loud moments. Most of the time it begins with very small feelings. So small that if a person is moving too fast they may miss them completely. It's like the way winter slowly leaves. There's never a bell announcing its departure. One morning people simply step outside and realize the air feels softer somehow. The human soul changes in very much the same way. Aquarius begins noticing that certain places which once felt safe now feel strangely suffocating. Conversations that once felt familiar suddenly feel distant. Goals they once poured their entire heart into no longer make the soul light up the same way. And truthfully, that realization can feel confusing. Because one part of them still wants stability. Still wants to remain the same person so they won't have to face change. But another part has already started waking up. Like someone slowly pulling open the curtains inside a room that has been dark for years, allowing light to enter little by little. Many Aquarius souls once believed they were simply tired, simply overwhelmed, that maybe after a few days of rest everything would go back to normal. But deep down they know this feeling is different from before. It isn't only exhaustion. It feels more like a quiet reminder that the soul has already outgrown the place it's been standing in for far too long. And when that happens, people begin seeing the world differently. Aquarius may stand in the middle of a crowded gathering, yet suddenly find themselves thinking about old dreams they once abandoned. They may appear successful by every outside standard, while quietly asking themselves inside, was I really born just to live like this? That isn't rebellion. And it isn't selfishness either. It's simply the moment when a soul begins longing to live more honestly with itself. And sometimes that becomes the beginning of something very important. The world often teaches people to stay strong, to adapt, to keep moving forward no matter what. But very few people talk about the courage it takes to admit that the old version of yourself no longer makes you happy. Aquarius often carries the heart of someone who wants to understand life on a deeper level. So, when they begin noticing these quiet shifts inside themselves, it may not actually be a sign of being lost. Maybe it's simply the soul trying to guide them back toward who they truly are. Like a tree that keeps growing, eventually it can no longer remain inside the same small pot forever. That pot once protected it, once made it feel safe. But one day, the roots begin pressing against the edges. And if the tree stays there too long, it stops growing. People are sometimes the same way. Aquarius may be moving through a season where their soul is becoming bigger than the old container that once held it. Of course, that doesn't feel comfortable right away. Change often comes with an in-between feeling. Part of you wants to move forward while another part is afraid of losing what once felt familiar. But maybe these tiny signals, these quiet emotional shifts, are gently leading Aquarius closer to a version of themselves that feels more peaceful, more honest, and more alive than before. When someone begins realizing that their soul has outgrown the old box that once held it, they often enter a very unusual season of life. A season where the outside world may not appear very different, but the inner world is quietly shifting day by day. Aquarius slowly begins to understand that what they've been searching for all this time may not exist somewhere else. Not in a new city, a new career, or in some perfect life people like to imagine from the outside. Maybe it's simply found in returning closer to themselves. It sounds simple, but truthfully that journey is difficult for a lot of people. Because while growing up, most of us learn how to become versions of ourselves that society can more easily accept. We learn how to say the right things, how to behave in ways that fit in, how to hide the parts of ourselves that feel too sensitive, too emotional, or too different. And Aquarius may understand that feeling more deeply than most. Their minds are often filled with thoughts that run incredibly deep. Questions about life that don't always feel easy to share with other people. And yet, for many years they become used to shrinking themselves down just to avoid standing out too much in the crowd. Like a vast open sky trying to squeeze itself into a tiny window frame. At first that may seem easier. Less attention. Less misunderstanding. Less discomfort from the people around them. But the longer Aquarius lives inside that smaller version of themselves, the more a strange sadness begins growing quietly inside. A sadness that doesn't come from lacking something external, but from losing connection with themselves for far too long. There are nights when they look back at who they used to be years ago. A version of themselves that once felt more inspired, more curious about life. A soul that carried simple but beautiful dreams. And suddenly they wonder, when did I start living just to survive? That question alone is enough to make many hearts grow heavy. Because sooner or later, most people realize that adulthood sometimes causes us to abandon the softest parts of our souls. Aquarius once believed that being strong meant enduring everything, not needing anyone to understand them, continuing forward even when they were emotionally exhausted. But after everything, they slowly begin understanding something different. That real maturity may actually look like having the courage to live a little more honestly with your emotions. To admit when you're hurt. To say when you need rest. To stop chasing expectations that slowly drain the life out of your spirit. And little by little, Aquarius stops apologizing for being different. They stop forcing themselves to fit into every space around them. Because a tree never apologizes for growing toward the light. And a river never apologizes for wanting to reach the ocean. People are sometimes the same way. The soul will always try to return to the place where it's allowed to fully be itself. And maybe the most beautiful part of this journey is that when Aquarius begins living more honestly, they also become gentler with themselves. They stop blaming themselves for feeling too deeply. Stop feeling ashamed for thinking differently from everyone else. Stop treating sensitivity like a weakness that needs to be hidden away. Because the people who feel life deeply are often the same people capable of bringing healing to others. A kind word. A hug at the right moment. A quiet understanding that asks for nothing in return. Those are the things this world still desperately needs. And maybe the journey Aquarius is walking through right now isn't really about becoming someone completely new. Maybe it's about returning to the truest version of themselves, the version that had been forgotten for a very long time. Like the night sky after a storm. It never truly disappeared. There were simply too many heavy clouds covering it for too long. And then one day, the clouds slowly begin to part. And the sky finally opens again, exactly as it was always meant to. When someone begins living more honestly with themselves, they often start noticing things they were never quiet enough to see before. Aquarius is no different. After months of trying to reconnect with their real emotions, they slowly begin sensing more clearly what still feels aligned with their soul, and what has only remained out of habit and familiarity. It's a difficult feeling to describe. Like returning to a cafe you once deeply loved, sitting in the same old seat, hearing the same familiar song, playing softly in the background, yet realizing your heart no longer responds the way it once did. Everything looks the same, but the person inside has changed. And truthfully, that can become one of the saddest realizations for Aquarius. Because they are the kind of people who grow deeply attached to memories. They remember the small things. The way someone once made them feel understood. The warmth of moments that once felt like they would last forever. So when distance slowly begins to appear, they rarely accept it right away. Aquarius doesn't walk away from people quickly. They stay for a very long time. They stay inside relationships that have already started exhausting them. They stay in places that no longer bring peace to the heart. They stay hoping that, maybe if they try just a little harder, everything will somehow return to the way it used to be. But some things in life cannot be held together through effort alone. It's like an old piece of clothing that once fit perfectly years ago. It once made you feel beautiful, safe, comfortable. But over time you grow. Your view of life changes. And suddenly that same piece no longer fits the person you've become. The clothing isn't bad. It's simply no longer meant for who you are now. People can be the same way. Not every relationship fades because someone was wrong. Not every distance comes from betrayal or heartbreak. Sometimes two souls are simply growing in different directions. And maybe the hardest part is accepting that truth, without turning it into resentment. Aquarius often carries an incredibly gentle heart. They tend to empathize with other people's pain more easily than their own. And because of that, they often endure far longer than they should just to avoid hurting anyone else. They stay silent about the things that wound them. They adjust themselves to keep the peace. They continue showing up with familiar smiles, even when their inner world has already started running out of energy. But the human heart cannot survive forever inside places that force it to become smaller. A flower left too long inside a room, without sunlight, slowly loses its life. And Aquarius begins understanding something important. Loving other people does not mean abandoning yourself. And sometimes real maturity looks like learning how to let go with kindness. Without drama. Without hatred. Just quietly understanding that certain journeys have already fulfilled their purpose in your life. Of course, that realization can feel lonely for a while. Because after leaving behind what once felt familiar, people often step into a very wide silence. A silence where you are no longer your old self, but you also don't fully know who you are becoming yet. And that in-between season can tempt many people to return to old places, simply because loneliness feels uncomfortable. But Aquarius slowly realizes some doors must close so new light can finally enter. Like a room filled with too many old things, there's no space left for anything new to arrive. And sometimes the most beautiful thing a person can do for themselves is gather enough courage to say, I'm grateful for what once existed, but I also deserve a new space to continue growing. That realization doesn't make Aquarius colder. If anything, it makes them softer in a much wiser way. They begin loving others through freedom instead of attachment. They begin listening to their own emotions instead of endlessly sacrificing themselves. And perhaps most importantly, they begin understanding that a healthy heart is not a heart that manages to hold on to everything forever. It's a heart that knows when to open the door and when to gently close it to protect the light still living inside. After a few old doors slowly begin to close, Aquarius often enters a very unusual season of life, a season where everything suddenly feels much slower than before. Fewer conversations, less excitement, less desire to throw themselves into the same familiar noise. And truthfully, that can make a lot of people anxious. Because we live in a world that constantly pressures people to keep moving, to stay busy, to have clear plans, to prove they're always moving forward. So when life suddenly becomes quiet, many people immediately assume they're falling behind. Aquarius has felt that too. They watch everyone else continuing to move ahead, while they themselves feel stuck inside a wide, unfamiliar silence they don't even know how to describe. Like a train unexpectedly stopping in the middle of the night, the familiar sounds of movement disappear, and all that's left is the sound of their own breathing inside a long stretch of silence. Some people try to fill that emptiness immediately with new work, constant social plans, or by keeping themselves so busy they no longer have time to truly feel anything. But deep inside, Aquarius slowly begins understanding that not every silence means loss. Some quiet seasons arrive, so people can finally rest after years of forcing themselves to stay strong for too long. Other quiet seasons arrive, so the soul finally has enough space to heal. Nature works the same way. Winter often looks lifeless from the outside. Bare trees, gray skies, everything appearing asleep beneath the cold wind. But deep underneath the ground the roots are still growing quietly every single day. Nobody sees it immediately. Sometimes the world above even makes it seem as if life itself has disappeared. But nature never stops doing its work. And people are sometimes the same way. Aquarius may be moving through a season like that right now. A season where the results still aren't clear. Where the answers still feel blurry. Some old dreams have already faded away, while the new ones still haven't fully taken shape yet. And that in-between space can make the heart feel uncertain. Because people naturally want to know where they're going. They want reassurance that these inner changes are leading somewhere meaningful. But some of the most important journeys in life never begin with certainty. They begin with intuition. With the quiet feeling that you can no longer continue living the same way you used to, even if you still don't know exactly who you're becoming yet. Maybe that's why many Aquarius souls lately feel more sensitive to peace itself. They begin enjoying quiet evenings more. Long walks alone. Honest conversations instead of shallow connections. Some people may call that change. But maybe it's simply the soul finally returning to its natural rhythm again. Aquarius has spent many years trying to stay strong for the world. Trying to adapt. Trying to endure. Trying to become the version of themselves that made everyone else feel safe. So when they begin learning how to slow down, that actually becomes a very deep form of growth. Because living honestly doesn't always mean doing something dramatic. Sometimes it simply means admitting that you need rest. Having the courage to sit quietly with your emotions, instead of immediately running away from them. Allowing the heart time to recover, after years of surviving in constant tension. And maybe the most beautiful part of this season is that Aquarius begins understanding that a person's worth is not measured by how fast they move through life. It's measured by whether they are truly living in alignment with their soul. A tree does not grow by forcing its branches upward every day. It grows through time, through silent seasons, through roots that quietly deepen beneath the earth before they're finally strong enough to reach toward the light. And Aquarius may be standing in that exact season right now. A season that appears slower from the outside while deep within, the soul is quietly learning how to grow in a far deeper way than before. After all the silence, the disconnection, and the long nights spent learning how to sit alone with themselves, Aquarius begins changing in a very deep way. Not exactly changing into someone completely different, but more like slowly removing layers they've been wearing for far too long. Layers that once helped them survive in the world, helped them avoid getting hurt, helped them feel safe in crowded spaces. But at the same time, those same layers slowly pulled them away from who they truly were. Many Aquarius souls grow up feeling like they have to be just enough. Different enough to keep their individuality, but not so different that people look at them like they don't belong. So they learn how to hide certain honest parts of themselves. They hide their sensitivity whenever emotions run too deep. Hide thoughts that don't match the crowd. Hide dreams that sound too distant or unrealistic. And over time they become used to showing the world only the version of themselves that feels easiest to accept. Like someone standing in the middle of a brightly lit room, yet instinctively stepping backward into the shadows, so nobody notices them too much. Aquarius is often less afraid of loneliness than they are of being misunderstood. Because they experience life in a deeply personal way. They see sadness hiding behind smiles. They see emptiness behind polished success. They notice the quiet things most people are too distracted to stop and feel. But sometimes that depth of feeling can also make them feel isolated. There are thoughts they don't know how to share with anyone. Emotions they hide carefully, afraid people might call them too sensitive. And slowly, Aquarius begins dimming their own light. Not because they are weak, but because they've spent so long trying to blend in, trying not to seem too different from everyone else. But you know, if a lamp stays covered beneath too many layers of fabric for too long, eventually it forgets how brightly it was ever capable of shining. People can be the same way. A soul that constantly suppresses its true nature will eventually become exhausted without fully understanding why. And maybe that's what Aquarius is finally beginning to realize. That what makes them special was never their ability to become like everyone else. It was always their ability to see life from a deeper perspective. A depth that allows them to empathize with people who are hurting. To question the true meaning of life. To search for sincerity in a world so easily distracted by appearances. That isn't something to hide. It's a gift. A gift that may sometimes feel lonely, but can also bring tremendous light into the lives of others. Aquarius slowly begins understanding that they do not need to become perfect in order to deserve love. They do not need to appear strong all the time. Do not need to stay positive every moment. Do not need to have every answer figured out. They simply need to become a little more honest with themselves each day. And strangely enough, when a person stops trying to become the version the world expects, they often begin breathing more freely. Aquarius slowly stops apologizing for feeling too deeply. Stops blaming themselves for not fitting into the crowd. Stops forcing their heart into silence whenever it wants to speak honestly. Because the sky has never needed to apologize for being too wide. And the ocean has never needed to apologize for being too deep. People are born with different natures. And maybe the most beautiful thing someone can do in this lifetime is not becoming someone else entirely. Maybe it's simply finding the courage to return to who they truly were all along. That journey is not always easy. There will still be days when Aquarius doubts themselves. Days when they fear being misunderstood. Days when they want to shrink back into old versions of themselves again. But deep inside, a part of their light has already started waking up. And once a soul finally sees its own light clearly, it becomes very difficult to spend the rest of life hiding in darkness again. Maybe the new door opening right now is not here to transform Aquarius into some more perfect version of themselves. Maybe it's simply here to remind them of something gentle, that an honest heart was already beautiful from the very beginning. After all of those quiet interchanges, Aquarius slowly begins realizing something strange about life. Many of the most important doors we ever walk through do not appear the moment we finally notice them. They've often been there for a very long time. Hidden inside the instincts we ignored because we thought we were too sensitive. Hidden inside the quiet urge to change before we were brave enough to even name it. Hidden inside those nights spent staring at the ceiling, already knowing the heart was longing for something different. A lot of people believe life changes through one huge moment, a bold decision, a dramatic event, a turning point strong enough to instantly change everything. But truthfully, some of the deepest transformations arrive very quietly, like sunrise. Nobody truly sees the exact second. The sky changes from night into morning. The light simply spreads little by little until suddenly, people realize the darkness no longer feels the same. Aquarius may be walking through a season like that right now. A season where not much has visibly changed on the outside, yet deep within, the soul has already started moving in a new direction. They no longer want to live only to satisfy everyone else. No longer want to keep shrinking themselves to fit inside spaces that have already become too small. They begin learning how to trust their intuition more. Listening to what brings peace to the heart. Listening to the places where the soul feels lighter. Listening to the honest version of themselves that got lost beneath all the noise of life. Of course, that doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes clear. There will still be days when Aquarius feels uncertain. Days when they wonder if they're truly moving in the right direction. Days when they question whether these inner changes are really leading anywhere meaningful at all. But maybe life never required us to see the entire road from the beginning. Sometimes the only thing we truly need is enough courage to take one small step toward the light. One small step toward being more honest about our emotions. One small step away from living entirely through other people's expectations. One small step toward believing that our soul deserves to be heard too. And maybe years from now, Aquarius will look back on this season that once felt confusing and realize it was actually the most important turning point of their life. Not because they became a more perfect person, but because for the first time, they finally stopped running away from themselves. There's something beautiful about souls that have survived deep pain. As they slowly heal themselves, they often become gentler with the world too. Aquarius may not fully realize that yet, but simply choosing to live more honestly already creates a different kind of light. A light that doesn't come from trying to stand out, but from sincerity. And in a world where so many people are trying to become someone else, a person brave enough to live truthfully with their own soul is something deeply rare. So if Aquarius still feels caught in between today, still feels like they're standing inside changes they can't fully explain yet, that's okay. A seed spends a very long time in darkness before it ever blooms. A river passes through countless uncertain turns before finally reaching the ocean. People are sometimes the same way. And maybe the most important thing isn't knowing exactly what the future will become. Maybe it's simply whether we can stay connected to our own heart along the journey. Aquarius has spent many years trying to stay strong, trying to endure, trying to become the version the world expected them to be. But maybe from this very moment a new chapter is quietly beginning. A chapter that does not demand perfection. Only a little more honesty than yesterday. A little more gentleness toward themselves. And enough faith to believe that the light inside them deserves to exist exactly as it is. And if you've stayed here until these final moments, maybe some part of today's story touched your heart too. Maybe you are also walking through a season where your soul is changing in very quiet ways. If that's true, I hope you won't rush yourself too harshly. Life does not always require immediate answers. Sometimes the most beautiful thing we can do is give ourselves enough time to grow, to heal, and to return to who we truly were all along. And wherever this journey may be leading Aquarius, I hope that in the middle of all the noise in this world, you never lose the quiet light that makes your soul uniquely yours.